Picture a world where a man's worth was measured purely by his capacity to inflict violence. The Bronze Age had no concept of humanism. If you were stronger, you were right. If you were slower, you died. All of ancient Greek culture before Odysseus hinged on one brutal concept: kleos. Glory bought exclusively through blood on the battlefield. No compromises, no diplomacy. Achilles was the absolute embodiment of this logic, a human weapon driven by pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't care about tomorrow because his strategy was simple: arrive, crush, die young, and become a myth. But that system hits an inevitable dead end. Against the walls of Troy, Achilles' sheer physical force is completely useless. 10 years of slaughter under those ramparts yielded nothing but piles of corpses and depleted resources. Nolan strips away the mythic gloss right from the start. His Trojan War is a grueling, filthy siege. It's the exact moment where raw physical power shatters against monumental, unyielding architecture. You cannot breach the walls of Troy by bashing your head against them, no matter how heavy your armor is. Brute strength reached its limit. And that's when Odysseus enters, a warrior without Achilles' muscle, but far more dangerous. Odysseus is the first to realize, if you can't break an obstacle from the outside, you have to rewrite the minds of the people inside. Troy can only be taken through a mental breach. That's how the Trojan horse was born. In Nolan's framework, this isn't just a wooden trick. It's the first psychological operation in history, a prototype of an informational virus. Odysseus studies his enemy. He knows the Trojans' religious fanaticism, their pride, and their vulnerabilities. He creates a gift that the Trojans will weep with joy to drag past their own impenetrable walls. Think of how Nolan portrays the creation of the atomic bomb in Oppenheimer. It's the exact moment war shifts from a physical brawl into an abstract math of destruction. Odysseus is the Oppenheimer of the Bronze Age. When he packs his soldiers into the dark belly of the wooden horse, he looks at them without a trace of sympathy. To him, they aren't brothers in arms. They're raw computational material, a payload. Inside the horse, there's total silence. The men choke on the heat and fear while Odysseus coldly calculates the minutes. He despises Achilles' old ethos. He doesn't want a glorious death. He wants a result. And Troy falls, not because the Greeks got stronger, but because their leader was the first to abandon the rules of the game. He won by turning the enemy's own ego into their grave. But that mental shift demands a heavy toll. By abandoning the concept of a fair fight, Odysseus takes his first step toward dismantling his own humanity. He's no longer a hero in the classic sense. He's an engineer of perception, a sociopathic strategist who realized reality is malleable if you're willing to sacrifice morality and human lives. Troy burns, and the Greeks celebrate a victory, completely unaware that their old world of physical honor just died. The era of cold, pragmatic manipulators has begun. Yet if you learn to hack minds and shed morality so easily, what happens when reality starts hacking back at you? After the horror of Troy, the winds drag Odysseus's battered fleet to the shores of the Lotus Eaters. Traditional mythology usually glides past this episode in a couple of sentences. They landed, ate some plants, and sailed off. In Nolan's hands, this becomes a terrifying psychological thriller. Forget the fairy tale paradise. The island of the Lotus Eaters is a zone of pure, suffocating stagnation. Visually, the environment feels claustrophobic and warm. Dense, dust-choked air and a sea without a single breath of wind. Time doesn't flow here, it rots. The locals aren't hostile. They don't charge at the Greeks with spears. Instead, They welcome them with gentle, serene smiles and offer them a taste of their native fruit, the lotus. And here comes the shift. The lotus isn't just a plant. It's an ideal mental anesthetic. It instantly wipes away memory, duty, home, trauma, and war. A few scouts eat a bite, and their faces change immediately. The agonizing tension they've carried for 10 years simply evaporates. Their shoulders drop, and their eyes go blank and utterly peaceful. Think of limbo in Nolan's Inception, that bottom tier of consciousness where the mind drowns in infinite, comfortable delusion. The lotus eaters inhabit that exact state. Psychologically, it's the ultimate expression of the passive shadow, the deep, subconscious desire to drop the burden of responsibility, stop fighting, and dissolve into nothingness. The men no longer want Ithaca. Why brave storms and bleed over oars for a distant home when you can sit on the sand and freeze in an eternal now? Odysseus watches his best warriors turn into placid ghosts right before his eyes. They sit by the water, staring at nothing, murmuring softly in response to his orders. This poses a core ethical dilemma. Does a leader have the right to shatter someone's happiness if that happiness is built on an illusion? For Odysseus, the answer is obvious, but it isn't driven by empathy. A happy, relaxed man is useless to his grand design. He's deadweight. He doesn't need happy vegetables. He needs functional units. He needs calloused hands to row and angry eyes to hold a shield. He needs their trauma because pain is the only thing driving them forward. So Odysseus resorts to raw violence. He doesn't bother reasoning with them. He grabs his weeping men by the collar and drags them toward the ships. The scene is agonizing. The men scream, beg to stay on the beach, and claw at the rocks like children being dragged out of a warm bed into the freezing cold. Odysseus shoves them into the dark hold and binds them to the benches. He drags them back into the hell of reality against their will. It's an act of pure tyranny of the ego. Odysseus is so obsessed with his master goal, returning to Ithaca and reclaiming his title, that he will crush the psychological comfort of anyone under his command. The trajectory is preserved. The ships push off from the shore, but there's no trust left on board. The crew looks at their captain not with admiration, but with cold, animal fear. They realize that to this man, their peace of mind and mental health mean absolutely nothing. They are just fuel for his long journey home. The next frontier is the cave of the Cyclops. Nolan treats Polyphemus not as a fairy tale monster, but as raw, unbridled, blind effect living completely outside order. The cave is a suffocating, pitch-black prison of rough stone where a human feels like an ant. No rules, no culture, no law. Polyphemus is the primordial shadow, an untamed, deaf instinct. He doesn't negotiate, and he doesn't care about Greek hospitality. He simply grabs men, snaps their bones, and devours them. Odysseus makes a massive mistake at first. He enters the cave out of sheer arrogance. He's still drunk on his victory over Troy, thinking his status as king of Ithaca will protect him anywhere. Polyphemus crushes that illusion instantly. He rolls a massive boulder over the entrance that 100 men couldn't budge, then rips 2 soldiers apart right in front of Odysseus. In that moment, the king realizes his status, his armor, and his legacy mean nothing here. Facing absolute, blind chaos, your ego is completely worthless. If Odysseus tries to fight the Cyclops with a sword and slays him in his sleep, they still die in that cave because nobody can move the stone blocking the exit. Force is useless once again. To survive, Odysseus has to execute a radical psychological maneuver. He has to completely erase his identity. he must cease to exist for the monster. He gets the Cyclops heavily intoxicated on unmixed wine. When the giant asks for his name, Odysseus doesn't say, "I am the king of Ithaca, conqueror of Troy." He says, "My name is nobody." In Greek, Odysseus. Think about that sacrifice. A man who spent a decade building a name to echo through history voluntarily flattens his ego to zero. He abandons his rank, his past, and his pride. He becomes a blank slate. They heat a massive wooden stake in the fire and drive it into Polyphemus's single eye. Bloody chaos explodes inside the cave as the blinded giant roars in agony, calling for the other Cyclopes. The others rush to the sealed entrance and shout, "Who is hurting you? Who is killing you?" And Polyphemus roars across the island, "Nobody. Nobody is killing me." His kin simply walk away, assuming he's gone mad. The phrase, "nobody," functions like a logical glitch in a system of chaos. Odysseus doesn't win with a blade. He wins with a linguistic and psychological paradox. How do they escape? Polyphemus sits at the cave mouth, feeling the back of every sheep he lets out to pasture, searching for men. Odysseus orders his crew to tie themselves beneath the bellies of the rams. Clinging to the thick wool under the animals, they literally crawl out covered in dirt and dung. Look at the image. The great conquerors of Troy escape by clinging to livestock bellies. Survival forced them to drop to the most degraded, animalistic level of existence. They break free and push off from the shore. It seems like a total triumph of logic over brute strength. But then, the psychological spring Odysseus compressed inside himself snaps back. His wounded ego can't take it. How could he, the great Odysseus, hide under a ram and call himself nobody? Standing on the deck of his departing ship, ignoring the frantic pleas of his terrified crew, he screams at the giant, "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." That single boast becomes his ultimate curse. Fragile vanity destroys the fruits of a brilliant strategy. Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon, god of the sea. Armed with his attacker's true name, he prays to his father for vengeance. Poseidon curses Odysseus to 10 years of wandering, the death of his entire crew, and total loss. Odysseus saved his life when he became nobody, but his bloated, proud "I couldn't handle anonymity" and ended up destroying his own future. Nolan framed this as the fatal flaw of any leader. You can calculate 1,000 moves ahead, but if you can't master your own vanity, you'll tie the noose around your own neck. After the disaster at Polyphemus's island, Odysseus lands on Aa, the domain of Circe. In myth, she's a sorceress. In Nolan's vision, she's a master manipulator who exploits raw human instinct. Circe welcomes the exhausted Greeks with a lavish feast. After years of starvation, filth, and constant terror, the men snap. They gorge themselves, drink unmixed wine, and revert to beasts. Circe doesn't need magic wands. Using psychoactive drugs and targeted temptation, she simply nudges them to unleash what was already lurking inside them. They turn into swine, not through a magic spell, but because underneath their thin layer of military discipline sat a raw, unchecked animal nature. Odysseus sets out to rescue them. Along the way, he receives an herb called moly. Nolan interprets this as a metaphor for absolute emotional immunity, a cold, analytical state of mind. When Circe offers Odysseus the poisoned cup and waits for him to drop to all fours, he drinks, looks her dead in the eye, and remains completely human. His mind is too locked onto his goals to succumb to cheap pleasure. He draws his sword and forces Circe to restore his men. But the lesson is etched forever. Without strict external control, human beings instantly degrade into beasts. Leaving Circe behind with her warnings, Odysseus approaches an even more insidious trial, the island of the Sirens. The Sirens aren't seductive mermaids. They embody the temptation of absolute knowledge. They sing of the past, the future, and the hidden truths of the universe. It's the ultimate trap for the mind. Odysseus knows no human brain can process their song without losing its sanity. If you hear it, you will fling yourself into the ocean and shatter your body against the rocks just to get closer. Yet Odysseus possesses a burning, almost pathological curiosity. He wants to hear the song, but he refuses to die for it. Here, Nolan showcases the architecture of restraint. If your willpower is weak against temptation, you must build a system that physically prevents you from making a mistake. Odysseus seals the ears of his entire crew with soft beeswax. They become completely deaf, pushing the oars forward like blind mechanical clockwork. He then orders his men to lash him securely to the main mast. His instructions are absolute. No matter how much I beg or scream, tie the ropes tighter. As the ship glides into the Sirens' territory, Nolan cuts the audio completely. A suffocating silence takes over, broken only by distorted, low-frequency vibrations. Odysseus convulses violently. His face contorts with madness, straining his joints to break free, foaming at the mouth. He screams at his men, ordering them to draw their swords and kill anyone who disobeys. The deaf crew can't hear a thing. They stare straight ahead and row right past the danger. A system designed by a rational mind in a moment of calm saves the man when he loses his sanity. You cannot trust yourself in the heat of temptation. The only way to survive is to tie your own hands in advance and surrender control to a rigid algorithm. Barely clear of the Sirens, the ship enters a narrow strait squeezed between two absolute horrors, Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis is a massive underwater abyss that swallows the ocean 3 times a day and spews it back out. If the ship gets caught, every single man dies. No exceptions. Scylla is a multi-headed monster dwelling high in the cliffside. She is guaranteed to swoop down and devour one man for every mouth she has. Exactly 6 men. No way around it. Odysseus faces the ultimate trolley problem, scaled to an agonizing extreme. There's no heroic third option. The choice is guaranteed total destruction versus the guaranteed sacrifice of 6 men. A traditional hero tries to perform an impossible miracle. Nolan's Odysseus is a cold, utilitarian pragmatist. He runs the numbers. He makes a terrifying decision. He steers the ship closer to Scylla, deliberately exposing one side of the deck to her lair. And worst of all, he tells his crew nothing. He knows if they realize 6 of them are about to be eaten alive, panic will erupt, they'll drop the oars, and Charybdis will drag the entire ship into the abyss. Nolan shoots the attack with chilling detachment. The ship glides along the cliff when monstrous heads strike down from the dark with blinding speed. 6 men are plucked straight off the deck. You hear the crunch of armor and bones as they scream Odysseus's name, reaching out to him from the creature's jaws. Odysseus stands at the helm, biting his lip until it bleeds, screaming at the survivors, "Row! Don't look up! Keep rowing, damn you!" They clear the strait. The ship survives. But the price of victory is 6 human lives, written off in cold blood by their own commander. That night at camp, the crew sits by the fire in dead silence. They look at Odysseus and understand everything. They no longer see a protector. They see a death mathematician who will trade any of them away if the math demands it. That is the core of Nolan's deconstruction. True leadership isn't about wearing a heroic cape. It's about carrying the weight of horrific, cynical decisions and continuing to march forward. Having survived the loss of his remaining ships, the wrath of Helios, and years of captivity on Calypso's island, Odysseus finally washes ashore on Ithaca. 20 years later. There's no triumphant parade. Odysseus steps onto his native soil completely alone. No army, no treasures, not even decent clothes. He is utterly destitute. Athena disguises him as a stooped, battered old beggar. There's deep meaning here. To reclaim his home, Odysseus must once again discard any external display of power. He enters his own palace, now overrun by suitors, arrogant young nobles squandering his estate, drinking his wine, and harassing his wife, Penelope. The suitors mock the old beggar. They shove him, toss gnawed bones at his feet, and force him to fight a local tramp for scrap meat. Imagine what that feels like for the man who took Troy and tricked the gods. The old Odysseus would have exploded in rage and slit their throats on the spot. By it, his fragile ego is long dead. Years of suffering taught Odysseus to endure any humiliation. He swallows the spit, bows his head, and quietly gathers intelligence. He becomes a sleeper agent inside his own home. He notes every entrance and exit, identifying which servants remained loyal and who betrayed him. Exhausted by the suitors' pressure, Penelope announces a contest. Whoever can string Odysseus's heavy bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads will win her hand. The bow is the ultimate symbol of true, rooted authority. The young suitors sweat and strain, trying to bend the wood, but not one of them possesses the raw technique or power to string it. Then the stooped beggar steps out from the corner. The suitors laugh. Look at the old man. Mind you don't break yourself, old-timer. Odysseus picks up the bow. In Nolan's hands, this becomes a moment of unbearable cinematic tension. Time slows down. Odysseus calmly inspects the wood, checking the string. He draws the bow in one fluid motion, without visible strain, relying on pure muscle memory and mechanics. The snap of the bowstring rings out like a cannon shot. The arrow whistles through all 12 axe rings and buries itself deep into the far oak door. Total silence falls over the hall. In an instant, the beggar's mask drops. Odysseus seals the only exit. His son Telemachus and 2 loyal servants step up beside him. What follows isn't a duel. It's a methodical, brutal purge. Nolan captures the slaughter without a shred of romantic flair. There are no stylish sword fights, only trapped, desperate men being cut down in a confined space. The suitors scramble around the hall unarmed, begging for mercy, offering riches and land. But Odysseus is completely deaf to their pleas. He burned Troy and fed his men to Scylla. These boys are nothing to him. When the arrows run out, they move in with spears and blades. The hall becomes a slaughterhouse. Odysseus exterminates every single one, washing away 20 years of humiliation in rivers of blood. Once the corpses are dragged out and the blood is scrubbed, the quietest, most complex scene unfolds, the reunion with Penelope. Penelope doesn't run into his arms. She stares at this cold, aging man covered in blood and fails to recognize her husband. Dozens of impostors had walked through her doors over the years. She sets one final trap. Turning to a servant, she says casually, "Move our great bed out of the bridal chamber and make it up with soft blankets." Odysseus snaps immediately. "Woman, how can anyone move my bed unless they cut it down? I built it myself around the trunk of a living olive tree that grew right on this hill." That's the climax. Their bed can never be moved because its foundation is a living tree rooted deep into the earth of Ithaca. It was a secret shared by only the two of them. Look at the grand metaphor. Odysseus shed his name, became nobody, hid under livestock, and hid behind a beggar's rags. Yet beneath all those layers of adaptation, his core identity remained unbroken. He was indestructible because his roots were anchored deep in his homeland. Penelope weeps and holds him close. He is home. The 20-year project is finally complete. Yet Nolan refuses a simple happy ending. In the final shot, Odysseus lies in his chamber next to Penelope. The camera slowly pans toward the window. Outside, the same restless sea controlled by Poseidon churns against the rocks. Odysseus stares silently at the ceiling. His eyes are hollow. A man who spent 2 decades in hyper-focus, survival mode, and relentless manipulation cannot simply slide back into a peaceful life. War and wandering became his true identity. He reclaimed his home, but lost the ability to be a normal man. The architect remains forever trapped inside his own maze.